It's Arjun Murti with a video this week in honor of America's upcoming 248th birthday on July 4th, where it declared independence from the King of England. And I wanted to take a moment to really celebrate all this country has succeeded, especially on the energy front. And I want to highlight a piece from a friend and colleague, Paul DeBar, who wrote a terrific op-ed in the Hoover Institute that talked about American energy superpower. It's a terrific perspective that I encourage all Super-Spiked readers to look up. We are a superpower, a position we should lean into in coming years. Energy supply makes all of us as Americans better off. It makes our allies better off. And we have the opportunity to help make everyone on Earth energy rich, to satisfy our own needs, but with our surpluses to provide energy to the rest of the world. Energy betters human lives, to quote another friend, the CEO of Liberty Energy, Chris Wright. And I've called this video American Energy Exceptionalism, and it really celebrates how fortunate we are with our endowment of substantial oil and natural gas resources, the fact that we're a technology sector superpower when we think about both getting more out of our existing oil and gas, but also in terms of new energies. And then finally, we're also a financial markets or capital markets superpower. And it's all three of those areas, which again, I'm going to credit Paul DeBar for sort of really well articulating, that makes us exceptional on the energy front. And of course, in this country, our system of capitalism and risk-taking that underpins our national wealth. And with that, let's get started. So I want to start by highlighting we are number one, actually by a long shot here, in both oil supply, which you see on the x-axis, and growth in oil supply, which you see on the y-axis. And frankly, it's not even a close call. When you think about how much attention countries like Russia and Saudi, which are down here near the bottom of this graph, get, and they are clearly important producers, we're actually nearly double each of those countries individually. And of course, you can see we're many multiples of other important OPEC producers in the Middle East and elsewhere. It is a remarkable position that we are in. It's not that these other countries don't matter. It's not that our citizens are not impacted by geopolitical or other volatility that may occur in any of these areas. But without any question, we are so much better off as a country, being by far the largest oil supplier in the world, but also the largest grower of oil supply. Over 90% of net oil supply growth over the last decade, that's what this growth number is, came from essentially U.S. shale, a remarkable achievement. I would also highlight that when you look at U.S. oil on a cost of supply basis, we are not necessarily the lowest cost supply. What we do have is a system of private land ownership, of entrepreneurialism and risk-taking, of capitalism, of rule of law, and of competition. We don't have one national oil company. We have hundreds, maybe sometimes to a fault, but we have hundreds, if not thousands, of independent producers and midstream companies and oil service and drillers and frackers and midstream and pipeline and refining. And I'm probably overstating some of these categories. All of that competition leads to the kind of success that you've seen here in the US on oil supply. Fortunately, as a result of that success, we are no longer number one in oil imports. And that is a remarkable achievement really from shale. And you can see from the depths of '08, where we were importing, pushing 13, 14 million barrels a day of crude oil, to go to a position where the US is nearly balanced on a net basis. We export light, import heavy, medium sours, but nearly net balanced on an oil net import basis. And with Canada, we are balanced. It's a remarkable success story. And let's contrast that to developing areas like India and really China. China is now at a point where they're the number one oil importer, and they are understandably freaked out about it and trying to figure out how to limit the future oil imports. China is a country that's gone from 1.5 to just under 4 barrels of oil consumption per person. They're no longer poor, they're middle income, but they're also not rich. And the prospect of China going to 7, 8, 10 barrels of oil per capita per person, we're at 20, Canada's at 22, South Korea's at over 20, various European countries and Japan are between 10 and 15 barrels per person. It is the EV push you see in China. The geopolitics are going to drive low carbon and new energies. You'd rather have a coal-fired EV if you're China than to have a Saudi, Russia, or for that matter, US shale or Canada oil sands fired ICE vehicle. Not a close call. And I think India is going to face this question going forward. They're currently at nearly 5 million barrels a day of oil imports. They're barely using 1.5 barrels of oil per capita. What happens when they get to 5 or 10 barrels of oil per capita, where you're talking over 20 and potentially over 40 million barrels a day of a total addressable market of oil demand? They too are going to try their hardest to electrify or figure out other new technologies or take other policy steps. You would much rather, it's not a close call, you would much rather be in the US position of being fortunate to, on a net basis, being balanced on our supply demand. We are really, really fortunate to be there. Let's turn to natural gas, where again, we are number one, not just in natural gas supply, which I think people know we have the largest amount of gas production in the world, the largest amount of gas demand in this country. It is also shale gas in particular has displaced a whole bunch of coal production over the last 15 to 20 years. But what's really, and that's the x-axis. What's notable on the y-axis is that in LNG exports, in 2023, according to the Energy Institute's terrific statistical review of world energy, previously done by BP, now done by the Energy Institute, just published last week, we, according to them, surpassed Qatar and are ahead of Australia as well as the number one LNG exporter. And that's up from essentially zero in the 2014-2015 period, a small amount of LNG exports back then, to now be the number one LNG exporter. And of course, there's a whole bunch of plans to take this even higher. That is really remarkable achievement. Oil refining capacity, we are top two. Again, according to the Energy Institute, China just eked us out last year in terms of having the most oil refining capacity. But we all know that in mining and critical minerals, one of the big competitive advantages China has is that they have the bulk of the refining and processing capacity. Thank goodness in oil refining, we still have a major, major position that is a blessing to our country in terms of the ability to produce gasoline and diesel and jet fuel for our citizens, and then to export our surpluses to the rest of the world. You can see historically here, a lot of the historic growth over the last decade is kind of, and again, it's the same growth of refining capacity x-axis against refining capacity growth in the y-axis. The bulk of the growth over the last decade has been in China and the Middle East. And again, when you look at new construction plans, both of those areas look like they're going to slow their expected growth quite meaningfully in the coming years. The world, I think, I'm going to say wrongly, has bought into some notion that peak demand is imminent. As you know, our view at Super-Spiked and at Veriten is that there is not a decade, let alone year, where anyone can declare today that refining capacity is going to have peaked. It is quite possible that US oil demand could be on the more mature side of things. And so to have this kind of dominant refining position at a time when, and low cost, generally good refineries, at a time when the rest of the world is really not investing, China is trying to go EVs, so sort of explains their slowdown in new refining capacity, new builds. India is probably going to have to ramp up what they're doing. But you're not seeing a lot of by way of new builds, and you're seeing here with Europe a shrinking position. They're fading. They're shutting down their capacity. We have in the US added a little bit over the last decade. They've been shrinking. Again, I think this is going to be a very healthy position to be in, and we should celebrate. We should be happy that the US has this much high quality, low cost refining capacity. When it comes to new energy technologies, we're top two in electric vehicles. And I'm going to say EVs are a new energy technology that is showing capacity of scaling. Yes, there are some subsidies in place, certainly in the US, to try and motivate or help consumers afford EVs, which are still more expensive. But I'm going to say that in contrast to some other areas where the subsidy explains like the entirety of the business model, I'm thinking some of the renewable fuels areas, even theoretical hydrogen, the quote green hydrogen, it's entirely subsidy based. Again, yes, there's a motivation or an incentive given to consumers here, but I'm going to call these more along the lines of real economics, where in the case of Tesla in the US and BYD in China, these are your top two companies. They vie with who has had more sales in a given quarter. They've grown because the people that have so far bought their vehicles have generally liked them. I'm going to call that true scaling. And this is a chart I'm showing here that went around Twitter last week. It's from Marlin Capital. And I think, I'm not sure what the exact intention was. It clearly shows a lot of negative stock price performance from a lot of the other EV startups. It's a hard business. And I think some people took this to sort of mock some of these companies for, quote, failing. I'm going to take a different take on this. I think this highlights that in the United States, we are willing to take risks. They don't always work out. Sometimes your company does go bankrupt or go to zero, but hopefully here in America, and sorry to be a little hokey about this, you have the chance to try again. We should welcome, we should celebrate risk-taking culture. Now, a couple of these companies, maybe one or two, maybe there were some questionable business practices. I'm going to put those companies aside. For everyone else that gave it a shot, I want to show respect for these companies and these entrepreneurs. Again, I'm a Wall Street person, and all of us on Wall Street who are spreadsheet warriors and we can create YouTube videos, it's very different to try and actually make something. These companies tried to make electric vehicles or other aspects of the train, of the value chain. They may not have succeeded, but I would like to show them respect. And I do. I think it speaks very positively about this country. It's certainly true that in China, and I think in India too, there is sort of a growing list of players in these spaces. But that culture where you take a risk, if you fail, the stock price goes to zero. I'm going to say that is part of our entrepreneurialism nature. It's part of capitalism. It's part of what makes us great. And so, again, I'm going to show respect to these companies that gave it a shot. It didn't work out for some of these stocks. And this is a week ago. Rivian's had a bounce here with their recent deal and so forth. But I think you get the point. Risk-taking is part of capitalism. We in America are also a tech superpower. We are number one, or we're going to be number one in artificial intelligence. We're certainly leading the way, but we're number one in innovation in general. It is part of our culture. It goes back to that risk-taking point. Yeah, I showed some examples of companies that did not work out. Here's a list of companies that have been absolute home runs. They've actually smoked all of these companies, the energy sector, at least the ones that are public, over the last period of time. And these are today the most important companies in the stock market. Our tech and innovation is not just rooted in our system of entrepreneurship, of private land ownership, of rule of law. It's also in attracting the best and brightest from around the world. So you have a company like Tesla, where Elon Musk, what everyone thinks of some of the uniqueness attributes of his personality, when you think about Tesla, 1.2 million plus sales, when you think about SpaceX and Starlink, it's amazing. And he's from South Africa originally. You've got NVIDIA, where Jensen Huang, I believe, is originally from Taiwan. You've got Microsoft and Google, Satya Nadella and Sundar Pichai, CEOs, both of apparent Indian heritage. You've got Jeff Bezos of Amazon from Houston. And I'm going to guess Sam Altman's from California. I don't know that for sure. And of course, Steve Jobs is originally from California, I believe San Francisco as well. So yes, you've got some folks born in America, but you've attracted the best and the brightest to run really the most important companies in the market today. Whether that'll be the case 20, 30, 50 years from now, who knows? But we are a tech superpower. And I'm just talking about the big companies here. There's a whole ecosystem of startup, of private equity, of venture capital that is core to the success of this country. We're also number one in finance and capital markets. We are a financial capital market superpower. This graph here is showing the stock price performance of the S&P 500 against a variety of various global indices. Japan somehow has actually kept pace with us over the last 10 years. I'm not 100% sure why. And you can see we've sort of smoked everybody else. But it's really not just about whether the S&P has rallied or not. When you think about debt markets, whether that's government debt, private debt, company debt, when you think about our private equity ecosystem, when you think about venture capital, all of the things go into the success and ultimately leads to this nice triumvirate of leading energy resources, oil, natural gas. We do also still have coal. We should be a leader in new energies. We certainly are in electric vehicles via Tesla. We are a leading technology and innovation country, and we're leading in capital markets and financial. When Paul DeMar talks about American energy superpower, it is about all of these facets of what makes this country so successful. Now, it wouldn't be right to highlight all these successes without also talking about a handful of areas where I think we could do a little better. We call this areas for improvement. The first is we are generally lacking in sufficient mining and critical minerals refining. So both mining for copper and all these kind of things, but also the refining, the processing of that. I mentioned we were top two, borderline number one in oil refining. We should be in these other areas. You could also perhaps critique the speed and efficiency of our nuclear build out. I think it's possible some other countries have done that well. At Veriten, I have a colleague, Brett Rampal, who oversees and leads our nuclear effort, a tremendous resource in understanding and helping us at Veriten and Super-Spiked think through these efforts and areas. There was obviously a hugely bipartisan bill. I want to say it was 88-2 that passed Congress to try and do some regulatory reform. I think there's a lot more steps that have to happen, and this is an area that this country could do a little bit better in going forward. One of the things that I find most perplexing is how we increasingly are putting roadblocks in front of our own companies. And so maybe I'll address this comment to politicians and perhaps activists who may not like, in this case, the oil and gas industry. No one's saying you have to like them. I work on Wall Street. I assure you, on Wall Street, we definitely do not like every last company out there. Okay. The point isn't to like them. The point is they are a critical strength to our country. And if you want to not like oil and gas companies, how about starting with the rest of the world? Could you please put roadblocks up in front of, say, National Iranian Oil Company or Lukoil or Gazprom in Russia? And there's probably a whole bunch of other countries and national oil companies we should be mentioning. Why would you want to put roadblocks in front of companies in your own country that are so critical to having availability and energy abundance, to having reliable energy supply, to having it be geopolitically secure, and to have it be affordable the vast bulk of the time? Put your roadblocks, start with your own. If you don't like oil and gas, that's fine. You don't have to. Start in the rest of the world, please. It is insanity targeting our own companies in your own country. How does that make any sense? This country also has a little bit of a we would rather pollute elsewhere mentality. That does not seem super okay. It probably goes back to the first one of minerals mining and critical minerals refining. If we're going to be serious about this stuff, and if we're going to care about ramping up in new energies, it can't be okay that somehow polluting in other countries, to use an environmental term, whatever fashion that means, whether we're talking SOx, NOx, or any other definition, we should be willing to invest in processes in our own country and not have this "it's okay to pollute elsewhere" mentality. So I'd like to end this video on a personal note and say, happy birthday to America. It is 240 years and it's been amazing. And I want to say, I know how lucky I am to be an American. I use this line, the lucky 1 billion. It really comes out of my own personal experience. My parents were born in 1939 and 1940. They were technically still part of colonial India at that time. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that when they were born, they were technically colonial subjects of England. It's remarkable. They came to this country in 1961 to go to Cornell University. They got married, came here to go to Cornell as graduate students. That was luck number one. They decided to come here. That luck number one for me. Luck number two is after graduating, I think they went back to India for a year and decided, you know what? They'd rather be in America. Luck number two for me. I was born in 1969. I am firstborn in this country, anchor baby, if you want to call it that. My parents have turned 2 suitcases, $25, and Cornell graduate degrees into 3 American children. They now have 7 American grandchildren. And within a generation, they have lived the American dream. My father is a retired dean at Harvard University in the engineering school. As you know, I'm a retired partner at Goldman Sachs and now a current partner at Veriten. And my sister and brother each have their own families and very successful lives. We are all super lucky. My parents came to America and they stayed. They also moved to New Jersey. So I'm a Yankees fan. Luck. I'm going to say that's luck number 3. They could have moved to Boston and I'd be a Red Sox fan. Or worse, what if my dad worked at the Bell Labs in South Jersey and we were Philadelphia sports fans? That definitely would have been unlucky. No, we lived in Northern Jersey and became Yankee fans. That's pretty lucky. Is everything perfect here? Of course not. Is my experience, my family's experience of the very successful emigration to America, the story of everyone? Of course it's not. But I'll ask you, where else would you rather live? What else would you rather be if you're not American? And I think everyone listening to this often hears me speak very positively about Canada. I do think Canada may be a close number 2. I love Canada. I love Canadian people, but I am still really lucky, really, really lucky that my parents chose to come here and that I am American. And with that, thank you. Happy birthday to America. I hope everyone has a great 4th of July holiday week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks after taking a little bit of a break here. Thank you.